environments. Maybe you're starting to get to more of a hybrid situation where you have some things sitting on premises, some things sitting in the cloud, maybe multiple clouds even, not just Azure. And so when you get into that sort of world, what we're seeing is that you have one set of tools for things like monitoring, backups, patching, all those sorts of operational duties on-prem, and then you have another set of tools you're using in the cloud, and things become a little disjointed, and people start forming teams like, hey, here's my cloud team, here's my on-prem team, and nobody really comes together. So the story here that I'm going to kind of show everybody today, and hopefully this becomes a little less hidden, is that Azure really is kind of three things to me. And I'll go to this next slide here just to have this behind as I'm speaking. But to me, Azure starts out being a data center, right? You can host things there, you can host your servers there and applications and all those sorts of things. Another thing that it is a set of PaaS services. Like for SQL Server world, everybody probably is familiar with the fact I could host a thing on Azure SQL DB and not have to run a server and things like that. But the third thing that Azure is really the set of tools that are out there that have been built over the last 10 to 15 years to help you manage all those assets in Azure. And so what Azure ARC is all about is like what you do is you install an agent on your local server sitting on premises, whether that's a Windows, Linux, or SQL Server. And now it's communicating with the Azure portal so you can use the Azure tool set to help manage your environment. And I think
can you change it to center mode?
I see.
It's showing. That's how it shows reading.
Okay.
Right click.
Let's see here.
Hide presenter. Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Unless, I mean.
No, that's fine. Yep. Okay. All right. So the gist of what Azure ARC is, like I said, is an agent running on your server. You're now communicating with Azure, and that allows you to use the tool set here. And so part of today's presentation is I'll talk through a few slides here real quick, but then we'll get into a real show and tell of how this all looks and feels. So you can walk away and hopefully go back to your company and say, hey, there's another set of tools out here that might be really valuable in helping us manage SQL Server, right? So so then why do you do this? This slide here kind of shows some feedback from people like, the complexity I talked about, that if I have things living in 3 different data centers, how do I get that single pane of glass view into everything? So now that's number one. Things like compliance, like if I have to go out and find information about all my assets, how do I do that? And it's a really time-consuming thing. I can even think of like, licensing where, every 3 years you do your licensing true up and you're asked to go collect information on all your SQL Server assets and Windows and everything, and you spend a lot of time doing that, right? So what I'll show you here with this tool set is how that's going to be a real time saver for things like that. So let's move on here. And so this slide just kind of shows the investment Microsoft is making in this overall. This is not just something that's going to be here for a few years and it's going to fade away. This is a big part of Microsoft's strategic initiative towards the cloud, is that, now some people are going to have at least a subset of their assets always on-prem, and we know this. But what we do see is that when people get exposed to the Azure portal via this, which you're going to see in a moment, that they are starting to, like, the mystery becomes a little less about what the cloud exactly is for the people who aren't there yet, right? And so for us, this is a big strategic move to keep investing in this, because we know that the more people that use this, the more people move to the cloud and things like that, right? So this is a huge part of so this slide just kind of shows all the investments that have been made over the last couple of years, and that's going to continue. Yeah, so this is just really kind of wraps everything into 3 easy kind of panes here. This here, this just shows, like I said, bringing the manageability of SQL Server anywhere, centralizing all that. As I mentioned here, it's going to help you simplify your migration to Azure should you ever want to do that. And over here on the right, I'm not going to talk a lot about this today. You've been hearing a lot of Fabric presentations, I think, in other areas, but there's also a vision there to kind of bring Fabric into the picture here, right, for your data overall. So let's see here. All of a sudden, my thing is frozen up. So let me get out of this here. Okay. So I just want to get to one last slide here real quick. And we'll sit on this for a little bit and talk about this. So All right. And I need to get out of this mode again. Here we go. Okay. So this slide is kind of the beginning of that story. When I say you can hook up to Azure and use all the tool set that's out in Azure, this slide here gives you the breakdown of what some of this tooling is. So I'm going to walk through this here real quick, and then we'll start doing more of a show and tell in the Azure portal. But over on the left-hand side, what you see here is if you have software assurance licensing on your SQL servers, you get all of these tooling for free as part of that value. On the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to see that there are a bunch of things that are just free no matter what. So that's a big part of the story here, is that a lot of these tools in Azure are free for your use. So when you talk about Azure ARC and cost-wise, it starts by being free from the very beginning. Now, there are some tools in the upper right-hand corner of this slide here that do come with a cost, and we'll walk through all these here, like I said. But you can see here about 2/3 of the stuff on this slide is free of charge for most people, because most people do have software assurance on their licensing, right? So, and if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it for now. But that said, so let's start with the left-hand side here. So there's this tool called the SQL Best Practice Assessment for one. I'm going to show you how this looks and feels. This thing goes out and looks at 450 points about your SQL Server and comes back with a nice report telling you, hey, here are some things that could help you improve your environment. Some of them are just truly what you would label as best practices traditionally, like just little switches you can turn on and off. But I'll show you in a moment how actually this helps you be proactive about performance and security as well. Then, I mentioned earlier this thing called the single pane of glass into all your assets. I'll show you what the tooling in Azure looks like around that, and how you can even extend that out into Power BI should you need more flexibility and vision into that data and everything. You'll notice here that there's some features here called auto patching and auto backup. Frankly, I'm going to skip right over those, because I think for most people on an enterprise level, there aren't going to be like huge bells and whistles for you. But I will say over on the right-hand side, you'll see a thing called Azure Update Manager. And if you want to talk about patching, that tool has now become free of charge for you as well if you use it from Azure through Azure ARC. So it's one of those things where if you're thinking about patching and maybe you're paying for a patching tool today or something, you can look at this and see maybe I could replace that and save some cost or something like that, right? And you'll notice monitoring on here. We'll walk through that in a moment as well. Over on the right-hand side in the very bottom corner, this talks a little bit more about the vision into your assets. So I'll show you what that looks like. You'll see here there's a detailed inventory that you can see very easily. So when I talked about that licensing earlier, collecting data, you'll see how that works. In the upper right-hand corner here, then you see things like Defender for SQL Server. That's going to come with a cost. So if you're interested in using that, ARC just makes it easier to set that up should you want to use it. Log analytics is a thing that's commonly used when you want to throw your log data into a centralized place and have really high performing compute behind it to do like real-time monitoring, things like that. That kind of goes hand in hand with Azure Monitor. But some of the tooling over here actually uses log analytics as its backend too. But so that could be a really nice feature if you ever said to yourself, hey, I'd like to centralize all the logs for my SQL and Windows servers into one big place where I can, run alerting on that and everything. That's what log analytics is for. Now that does come with a cost once again, but Azure ARC makes it very easy to set it up and things like that. And so then you'll see other things in here like Azure Policy and Azure Monitor. So for your traditional Active Directory administrators where they do policies with an Active Directory and things like that, this is a way to do similar things with a cloud tool is what it comes down to. So that said, let's get out of slide land here and move over into the real world and bring up my Azure portal. So before I move on here, any questions from anybody to this point? Does this all make sense so far? Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No additional.
Right.
What is that?
So what it means is, so Azure Arc itself is just an agent that you install on your server. So when you do that, and that's communicating with Azure now, there's no cost associated with that, number one. Then it's the tool set that's out in Azure that could come with a cost or maybe not. And so like I showed you on that slide, about 2/3 of that tool set comes for free. It's truly like free out there just for you to use. So Update Manager, for instance, if you want to go patch your servers with Update Manager, that's free of charge now for you to use,
So if
right?
someone, if,
Yeah,
say I have a client customer, whatever it is.
Yep.
That has no Azure services right now at all.
right.
I say, this is a free tier type of thing.
Yep.
What is that? What is that on top of some fundamental that's in?
You would have to set up a subscription in the Azure portal to start then. Yeah, so if you have no Azure, so you can see here now on my screen, I'm showing my Azure portal here. You'd have to have a subscription set up, but once again, by default, there's no cost for Azure. It's out there, you set up a subscription. It's going to require you to set up a payment type because you might use a service that comes with a cost, right? But with all this stuff I'm going to show you with Azure Arc, a huge chunk of it has no cost with it, right? So, no. No, actually, whenever you're using these tools, you don't get ingress, egress with most of it either. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the start of the cost story. And I know it's kind of hard to believe at first, right? You hear something free from Microsoft, you go like, what do you mean? That's got to be a catch, right? But just keep in mind, this truly is mostly free of charge. And I'll keep stressing that along the way, like what's free and what's not, as I show you some things here. So yeah, to your point here, the first thing you have to have in Azure is this concept called a resource group. If you don't know what that is, just think of it as a container for things to live, right? So when you Arc enable your server, which means you've installed your agent on a Windows server or a Linux server down in your on-prem environment, what happens is some objects start showing up in Azure now. And this is the first view you have of this stuff is. You'll see here there's an object here for your Windows level. So you see in the middle there, it's called Machine Azure Arc. And then you'll see if it's a SQL server, we separate that and give you a second object to represent that concept. And I'll stress again, this also works for Linux too, right? So if you happen to be running SQL on Linux, great. If you're just running a Linux server for any purpose, whether it's Oracle or whatever, like you can Arc enable your Linux servers as well, and you can manage them through this too. So, but this is the gist of how it all starts. You install this agent on your server. At the very end of this, I'm going to walk you through how you Arc enable a server just so you can see it. But for now, just realize that, hey, I'm installing a little piece of software on my server and it's now communicating with Azure. And now I start seeing these objects show up. And you may have noticed when I was at the top of the page here, you actually start getting separate objects for your databases as well. So your user databases, system databases, everything, you get individual objects. And I'll come back to this in a moment, but I'll drill into this just for a second. But the power of this is now you have concepts in Azure like tagging, right? So I can come out here now on this database and I could enter what applications are running on that database and things like that. And I'll show you in a moment how you can then use various query mechanisms within Azure to kind of find things like that too and everything. So this can truly become, like I said, your first step. This can become like a full-blown asset management system for you, like where you just all you do is Arc enable your servers and all this data flows up here. So when I say what data is flowing up here, let me just show you this real quick. I'll go back to one of the server objects and I'll bring up this SQL Server object actually. And so the first thing here, I'm going to come back to this in a little bit, show you what some more of these buttons over here are all about. But when I say the data being captured, it's just the very basic metadata about your server. So it's things like the server name, how many CPU cores are on there, patching level, as you can see, things like that. And so one of the first questions is, well, can Microsoft see this data? Because they could come out and audit me for licensing or something, right? And the answer is no, Microsoft cannot see any of this information. It's all just like anything you store in Azure, that's something that's yours. It's all encrypted and Microsoft has no access to any of this. So just want to get that out of the way that this is only for the customer's eyes only, right? Yeah.
Can I tell if the server's up?
I'm sorry?
Can I tell if the server is up or down?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, what I was going to do next is just show you the second view of this real quick here. So let me go. So this, I was showing you so far, this was a resource group out there once again, just a container, has a bunch of objects out there, but that could get a little messy, right? How do you find things? So there's actually an Azure ARC area of the Azure portal. And when you go in here, you can see now it starts to separate these things a little bit. So to your question about seeing servers up and down, here's one place you can see it. Like right here, it shows the ARC agent status. And you see in my case here, I enabled a bunch of servers at one point, but only one is actually currently connected. And I did this, mainly for demo purposes. I built some servers, ARC enabled them, got them out there. So this is one area you can see it, but of course you can build alerting around all that and everything now too, because once again, the data is centralized here. So yeah, you could build your whole alerting strategy right here around this metadata now, right? So. Yeah, so here in the Azure, just to poke around this a little bit here. So you can see that's your list of machines, but then it breaks out the SQL instances over here. And like I showed you earlier, I can drill in any of those and see the databases inside of those and everything. I'm going to touch on a few other subjects a little later. There's so for anybody who still has Windows 2012 or SQL 2012 or 2014, you may be purchasing extended security updates for those servers. And there is a model for that enabled by Azure ARC now, where if you ARC enable your server, you can now set that up all through Azure now instead of making a licensing agreement with your company. And so what happens then, you just get billed on a monthly bill going forward after that. And the specialist, the salesperson you work with, they'll work with you to make sure the cost ends up being the same or less than it is if you were to do the yearly signed agreements that a lot of people are used to doing, right? But the other time saver here is when you do it this way, the technicians know this, you have to go out and install a thing called a MAC key on your server to enable that. This automatically takes care of that for you. So when you say I ARC enable the server, I enable extended security updates on that server, it automatically pushes the MAC key down and then I can go get my patches, right? So it's a time saver operationally, and it's also a time saver as far as having to do a licensing agreement every single year along the way. So for those 3 years, because extended security updates only last for 3 years after something retires, right? So just a little side subject there real quick, but so that said, let me go over to yeah, next thing I want to show here. So I showed you how the first step of this is capturing some of that metadata about the server, right? So it's nice I can drill into individual servers and see that and everything. But one of the first tools you have here built into Azure, once again, and this is another free thing. Everything I've shown so far has no cost associated with it, right? So now I come to this thing called the dashboard in Azure. And I can build dashboards like this now to give me, like, once again, that single pane of glass view into all my assets. So whether things are living in Azure now, whether they live on-prem, connected through Azure ARC, they could even be in AWS. And I could go ARC enable those servers and they'll show up here in this portal. So this gives me that quick way to look and see, like, if your CIO says, hey, what's the breakdown of our SQL Server by version? You could have a really nice pie chart here to get a really quick view of that, et cetera. And it's unlimited here what you can build inside of this thing. When I work with customers on this every day, this is one of the first things I help them set up, is we have some pre-built things out there that are publicly available that you can just, all you do to set this up is you'll notice there's an upload button right here. This is just a JSON format behind the scenes here, so you can download that, export it here. And so that's sitting out on a Git repo somewhere, and you can just upload that JSON file into here, and you have this structure out of the box. What's happening behind the scenes is it's this little language called KQL, and this part of Azure that's called the Resource Graph Explorer. And so the way you get the data is you write these little KQL queries and then you get your data back. Well, that means learning another language, right? So, but a couple of things just to show you real quick on that subject. First of all, in the left-hand pane here, the hardest part about this language is really, well, what's that where clause all about? Like, if I want to get my ARC-enabled servers only, what's the value that I need for that? Well, you just come over here and you find the right asset, and when you pick on it, you can see here that it automatically generates that for you, number one. So that's pretty nice. But the other thing is you have little Copilot up here, right? And so maybe in your organizations, you're already using Copilot in Office 365 or something. Well, guess what? Microsoft is putting this concept of Copilot everywhere. So here in Azure, what you'll see is, and what's Copilot all about? It's all about helping you be better at using a particular tool, right? Because we all have to learn so many things in business. So I maybe don't learn every little bell and whistle about Excel. So Copilot helps me be better at Excel. Well, here in Azure, I might have somebody who's never been in the Azure portal before, and they say, well, how do I go find my quote ARC enabled servers now? So what they could do is just click on Copilot up here and just show this. And I can say, show me my ARC enabled servers. Give that a little second here. So in the background, this is using large language model generative AI technology to take what I typed in and translate that into something that makes sense in Azure, right? So let's see here. Now this time it didn't really actually give me the query, but sometimes when you try this, it actually generates that resource graph query I was just showing you there, and it'll actually have a little button next to it, and you click on it and it takes you there and you see it, right? So but the whole gist of this is, that whole language there, once you get a little feel for that and everything, now you can build dashboards like this. And so another one here, I'll just show you. I started building this one myself here to focus more on Windows a little bit because we had the SQL one out there for a couple of years with nothing on the Windows side. But the gist of this is like, yeah, this is the start of that story of a one-stop shop to see that information about all my assets, right? So does this all make sense so far about how all this works? Everything? Okay. All right. So that said, I'm going to go back to this real quick here. So when you combine this, if I go back out here to my Azure portal homepage again, and I drill into a server, now imagine you've got the data that's being auto-collected. That's all the basic metadata. And then you've got your tagging, like I started to show you earlier, that you can put more information in yourself. And when you combine all that together, that's the end of the story I said earlier about a true asset management system, right? That rather than paying for something, or I know a lot of companies that are self-building things. I've done that myself in the past. I built something myself to have all the data about all my SQL servers and had to go out there and manually put the data in and all those things. This now is something that's backed by Microsoft. It's not going away. You don't have to install software anywhere. All you do is ARC enable your servers and the data flows right in, right? So. All right. So to me, that's the first big free value of this ARC concept, right? Is just centralizing the view of all your assets. Then from there, it just branches out. So I talked about tags. So now let's go to the actual SQL Server object and drill into some of the other stuff available here now. So, all right. So you'll notice on the left-hand side, there's a whole ton of stuff. And I'm just going to walk through a few of these things here real quick. But number one, let's start from the very bottom here and talk about this thing called assessments. Like I said, you hear that Microsoft is giving this stuff away for free. And like I said, well, what's the motivation for that? Well, part of it is we do think people will think about moving to Azure, the less it's a mystery to them, right? So right here is a tool that if you do want to go to Azure with a particular SQL server, it used to be you had to go out and install this thing called Azure Migrate to help you analyze your environment. And it's a big software package you have to install and set it up and get it running and everything. But here, what you can do now is you might say, hey, I have an application that's about to retire. I'd like to go host that out on Azure so I don't have to think about it here in this other data center. And this is going to help you see your readiness for that migration. So you'll notice here on the screen here that there are 3 different flavors of SQL Server in Azure. You have your Azure SQL DB, which is the standalone database product. You have your managed instance, which is another PaaS service. You don't install a server for that, but you get more of the full feature set of SQL, like you get the SQL agent, the jobs, and all those things. Azure SQL DB, you don't really get anything but a database. That's about all you get. And then you have SQL Server on a VM. You say like a particular application vendor is going to tell you, we don't support anything but a SQL database sitting on an actual server or VM, right? So, but this is going to tell you your readiness for all 3. So then you can drill into these findings here. And you can say, hey, actually, I think SQL Managed Instance looks interesting for this case. I can see right here, these are the potential blockers. And what it's telling you is that, hey, I see XV command shell is out there on one of your stored procedures. That doesn't work in SQL MI, so you need to go either fix that or you need to live with that, one of the two, right? And then so that's the warnings page here, shows that specifically, as you can see right down here. So it's going to go find things like that that don't work in those products and tell you your readiness. And then it's even going to give you a suggestion for what size of asset to build based on the activity it sees. So here you're going to see that, hey, based on the activity we see here, it looks like you just need a general purpose provision thing and that and all that. And same thing for the SQL VM. It's going to tell you what type of VM to go build suggested and the size and all that kind of stuff, right? So anyway, the point of this is now you don't have to go install the entire Azure Migrate product to go analyze just one server. You have this tool built right in here now through Azure ARC, right? So, and once again, I'll reiterate, this is all free of charge stuff once again. So now here's the next thing. This is the thing called performance dashboard. You know, I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to go to best practice assessment first, because to me, when you put these tools together, this tool is more about being proactive about things. So I want to be proactive on performance, security, et cetera. I don't want to have as many application meltdowns when I come in at 8 a.m. in the morning. Whereas the performance dashboard is more about, hey, if that happens, I've got a tool out here to help me troubleshoot that and try to more quickly figure out what's going on, right? So this particular tool, I'm going to show you a couple things, but I'll drill right into some. So I ran this on my server over here. And just so you get a feel for what this looks like at the end of things is you get some graphs up here giving you a quick breakdown. Hey, we found 4 what we think are high priority things to take a look at. So it categorizes all the various findings. So if you only have 5 minutes on a given day, you can just say, hey, I want to focus in on those higher priority things. And then you come down here to the individual findings and you start, you can click on these, but you can see all this over here too. So for instance, down here, when I said performance, this isn't a super great example. I just have a database sitting out here with one table in it with no indexes on it. So there's an index finding down here that says, hey, if I click on that real quick, it says, hey, you should go look at that table and try to create some indexes because that's not great. But I will show you here in a second, like how it can go beyond that. It can look at the query history if you have an active server, and it can even say, hey, it looks like you're running this query a bunch of times and I see no index on that join column. So you should probably go put an index on that or you are going to have an application crash pretty soon, right? And we've all been through that where all of a sudden 5 more users start using an application, tips it over the edge, and then people are scrambling to fix what's going on, right? So like I said, this is all about being proactive about things like performance, security, et cetera. So just what are all the things that this thing is looking at? So let me go to this article real quick. This actually walks you through how to set up the tool and everything. So it gets a little hairy. So when I tell people, if you're interested in trying this out, definitely follow this article top to bottom because it goes through a lot of different security settings and things like that. Not a ton of stuff, but if you miss one along the way, then you try to run the tool and it just kind of sits there frozen. You have no idea why it's not running. So anyway, but what I want to really show you here is all the way at the bottom. It takes you out to this Git repo that lists out all the various things that are reviewed by this tool. And so I just want to point out a few things like, for instance, if you see auto create statistics should be on, most people would agree that's something that should be on. So if this tool finds I have 5 servers where that's flipped off, that's a pretty nice little bonus, right? But it gets more exciting to that to me. So if I search for index, for instance, now you can see things like, hey, there are potentially missing indexes out there. And this is what I was saying. If it really truly thinks there's an index you should create, it's even going to show you the potential create index statement that you can just take over to your server and go create that. And of course, you probably want to try it in a dev environment first and all those things. But the point here is that it's out there truly finding things that could impact performance, right? And I think everyone I would agree indexing is the #1 thing that you have to be on top of because that's where meltdowns happen, right? It's great that you can talk about weight stats and all those things, but why do weight stats go through the roof? Well, because you didn't have an index in the right place. So, right. So That said, then let's talk about security a little bit here. So let me just type in security real quick. Da, da, da. And you'll see here things like SQL logins with weak passwords, right? So, I mean, everybody has this situation where SQL logins proliferate if you don't have a hard, fast rule that you shouldn't have those in your environment or something. And I don't think you should not have them, but if you're going to have them, they should be for a very specific purpose, like an application connection or something like that, right? But some companies decide over the years, I'm going to use those as my actual login for an individual user, and people share them and they put a really weak password on it because they want to make it easy for everybody to remember and all those things. Well, this is just another example where this is going to help you identify that issue and help you potentially fix that, right? And it points out a thing like XP command shell, which that's another big debate in the community, right? Like, do you turn that thing on or do you not? Most people would agree that it is a potential security hole. And my opinion is, yes, you use it if it's useful, right? But don't just turn it on every server across the board. Only turn it on when you know that it's useful, things like that. But this is going to point out that maybe you have 17 servers out there where people turned it on for really no reason, and that's a security hole. So maybe you should go fix that, right? So like I said, best practice assessment, free of charge tool with a caveat. It does have log analytics storage behind the scenes for it. So you get 5 GB of free storage with that, and then we will start charging you for storage. And so just for a perspective though, you can see here, if it were to find all 455 things were an issue with a given server, and you take that times 1,000, that's not going to be 5 gig worth of storage, right? Anywhere near it. So the story here is that what you should do is, like, if I run this weekly or monthly, set up an automated process that gets rid of the data out of log analytics, and then you're going to be fine, right? And just have the latest and greatest findings sitting out there. So any questions or thoughts on that particular tool or concept at this point? Yeah.
The assessment that was on demand.
Yes. Yeah, you can schedule it on weekly, monthly, or you can go out there and run it manually anytime you want as well. So yeah, let me just go back to the interface real quick and just kind of show you that. So back here in the Azure portal, and go back to my home page here for this. So you can see here that I can go hit this run button anytime I want to, but then also here in this configuration, I can choose weekly or monthly over here and schedule it as well. So yeah.
Does it run against the slice or does it go out to the service itself?
It goes out to the service. So this particular feature, you'll see in the documentation, the NT authority account has to have SQL admin privileges to your server. Because think about it, if I'm going to find out what are the passwords on a login, or if I'm going to find the indexing information, it has to get into your system tables and everything, right? Up until this point, nothing about ARC needs admin privileges to your SQL server. Like that other metadata I showed you earlier, that's just coming from the registry and things like that. But when you use this tool, that needs actual access to your SQL databases then. Yeah. All right. So we did that. Now let's talk about, well, let's say I did all this and I was being really responsible, but actually I got a call at 9:30 and everybody in the company is screaming that my HR system is down. I can't find out what my PTO hours are, right? So let's see, I come over here now and I have this thing called a performance dashboard. I'm going to try to do a little bit of a live demo with this just so you can see it's real here. But so at the very top of this here, the concept here is that this thing covers a ton of information. And let me go to back to this article real quick and start from there just to show you a little of this. And I'll go over here to the monitoring tool. I'm just going to scroll down here a little bit. And so you'll see here it starts with active sessions. I'm going to show you that. It's going to show you blockers, things of that nature. And when you hear all this, you say like, well, I have tried and true ways of doing that. I'll go run an SPU2 and find all that info or whatever, right? But the whole concept here is across all this different data, it's trying to centralize it into one tool so you have kind of a one-stop shop. So If you drill down a little farther, here's basic CPU. I think we all know that basic CPU doesn't usually tell the whole story. Just because it says 65% use doesn't mean I don't have a CPU bound issue, right? When it comes to SQL Server. So that's not super exciting. I can get that wherever, but this does get down into the things that matter for SQL, including down here, I have my storage IO counters. That's huge in SQL, right? And then wait stats. So to me, those are the things that are really critical to see when you go to your VM administrator and say, hey, I need a couple more CPU cores. They're always going to push back and say, I don't want to over allocate CPU. And you can show, look, I have a CPU bound issue. I don't care that it says 80% use. And then they're going to agree with you, right? But you have to come with that evidence, or they're going to just tell you, hey, you need to go fix something else. I'm not going to just give out CPU like it's candy, right? So, but the point here is this covers a lot of different things. So back to the interface here, what you can choose to do here is set this dashboard up any way you want. You can have two of these tiles sitting out here. Like right now, I have the really uninteresting stuff like basic memory and CPU. It's not bad to see that, but we all know that the SQL Server uses all the memory you give it anyway, so that doesn't really tell you much. And we already discussed basic CPU, but now I can get down into here other things like, you know, my IO performance and my active sessions and things like that, and my write transactions per second you see there, and even block processes to even tell you in a one-stop view here that, oh, I have 3 different things that look interesting that I should branch out and go look into further, right? So like when I said I want to do like a little bit of a live demo here just to show this isn't just kind of a cut and paste kind of image I'm showing you there. Let me just kick off a process here real quick that says, actually, I'm going to go find my little while loop I have out here just so I can kick off some activity here. I'm just going to tell this thing to run in a loop forever and keep updating this table. And within a minute, you're going to start seeing that the CPU is going to start going up and things like that. So it takes about, this checks out there on a minute, on every minute basis and grabs the latest data from the server. And so if I go back here, you'll notice at the very beginning of this that the CPU and memory were a flat line for quite a while now, but you're going to start seeing things go up a little bit here in just a moment here, just to kind of prove things out. So any questions or thoughts on any of this to this point anyway?
It's good SQL Server that you're running.
This is because, you know, I didn't have an on-prem environment to emulate, so I put a VM out in Azure, but I set it up to make it look like it's an on-prem SQL, right? No, that's fine. The thing is, like, you can't actually ARC enable an Azure server because you already have all this value for that server. So to make it able, I had to go like, you have to turn some things off and everything to make it where you can even do that. But yeah, this is a VM that I'm running in an Azure data center as the source. But let's see here if this is starting to change at all. By now, we should see some differences. Yep, so now you see CPU starting to spike and things like that, right? So just wanted to kind of prove here, this isn't just, you know, like vaporware here. This actually does work. And you'll see it yourself if you try it out. You know, I could go through here real quick. I had a little thing set up where I could force a blocker and it will show up, but I'm not going to waste time doing that here again. So unless somebody really wants to see that for some reason, but that said, so that's the monitoring dashboard. Now, you know, you can set this up any way you want. So just to show you the drop downs here real quick, you basically just say, I want to add a chart to this. And you'll see it breaks it down into 2 types. One is focused on IO, and then you have everything else. And when you pick the performance counter as one, then you see a ton of stuff here you can pick from, just like I showed you over in that article there, right? And so you can put every single counter out there on one big dashboard, but I think most people are going to pick the 8 to 10 things that they think mean something to them and build their own dashboard and things like that. So yeah, and once again, free of charge, right? So everything I've shown you so far with that one caveat of the 5 gig of storage and log analytics, all of this stuff is just free tools. So back to the concept here from the beginning is, if you feel like you don't have a tool that can go out there and analyze your indexes, a lot of people are paying for tools to do that. You know, like Confio Ignite, which became SolarWinds DPA, fantastic tool. but it costs a lot of money, right? Your CIO doesn't like paying for stuff like that. So this is the kind of thing you can look at it and say, hey, do some of these tools do a similar job and maybe save yourself some money because these are all free of charge, right? And even the stuff that comes with a cost, maybe they cost less than the things you're paying for today. So that said, we did that. And so actually, I want to go back to the Windows object here just to drill. Actually, let's go through a few more things here real quick, see if there's any more interesting here. So you'll see here, there's a backup section. And if I say, I want to do the backup policies for the server, you can actually do the point in time restore concept with your on-prem servers. So if you're familiar with the Azure offerings, that's your only option in Azure SQL DB, for instance. Like you can't literally set up a backup process and then restore those databases. There's this concept where it's automatically taking care of that for you. And you just go to an interface and say, I want to restore it to 2:00 p.m. yesterday. And it restores your database on the side. So you can have, if you like the sound of that functionality, you can set that up now through Azure, and that can be your backup strategy, right? So it's up to you to decide if you want to do that or not, but it's out there. So I see you have a look. Any questions there? Yeah.
On-prem,
Yes.
quick time backup strategy.
Yeah.
Where this data go?
I'll have to double check on that for this because I was actually a little surprised this week. I opened this and I saw this interface was here. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. This has actually become prime time now. There's another backup thing that I said I'm not going to show you. That's not too exciting. All that thing does, it'll do an auto backup for you, but it writes the files locally. It uses your default backup location you've defined on the server. To me, that's not super exciting because your backup strategy is usually much bigger than that, right? But this particular tool, though, could be a backup strategy because this is you saying, I want Azure to manage my backups for me, and this is how we restore databases now and all those things, right? So an interesting thing to look into. This is the kind of thing I don't dig into too big on a first demo with people because you're not going to change your backup strategy overnight. But you might be interested in that dashboard tool, right? They're like, hey, that's a nice first step. That's a really good reason to install Azure ARC on my servers and get things like that going. Then I talk about with my team, hey, do we want to consider, changing our patching and backup strategy and things like that? But you don't do that overnight, right? That's huge. So anyway, I just want to show you that it's there, though. Then you see some other things, my server doesn't have availability groups, but you're going to see info about that here. Let me see anything else. So here's the update section. So this is where I said, like, you can use Update Manager as a true enterprise patching strategy. And this is going to lead you to the page to configure that and everything, but I'm not going to deep dive into that particular tool today. So let's see if there's anything else interesting out here. Not really a whole lot there. So let's go over to the Windows Server object real quick just to show you some things there. Because of the DBA, yeah, you manage the SQL Server, but the Windows Server underlying it is part of the picture, right? So once again, this has a whole bunch of bells and whistles on the left-hand side. You'll see there's a best practice assessment actually for the Windows level. So let me see here real quick. I think I tried running this the other day to see if I would get anything back. So let me see if that ever finished. Yeah, you'll see here it actually ran and so similar to the best practices for SQL Server, there's a tool now for the Windows level as well that you can run and get findings just like that one. And so you'll see here on my screen, that's what the findings look like. I haven't dug too much into what this particular thing looks for, but you can at least see that it's out there. So you see all kinds of tools, so when you get down to your Windows admins on your team, they worry about a whole lot more things than maybe you do, a bigger variety at least. So because they're worried about patching and security patching and all the things more often than your DBAs are. But so there's just a lot more stuff. So some interesting stuff is like there's this change tracking tool. So if you look at the documentation on this is literally out there looking for a bunch of different places that people could be making changes on your Windows server. And it's coming back and telling you, oh, here's a nice report of everything that's being changed and who did it and things like that, right? So some of these tools used to come with a cost, but you'll see here in a moment that I'll show you on a screen where you set the software assurance part of this up. but it lists out on a nice screen like all the value that comes for free now on the Windows side. It used to be up until November last year, most of the free value was on the SQL Server side, but now we have a lot more stuff on the Windows side that's free of charge. And I think Update Manager is the real headliner because that's a huge concept for free, but there are a lot of other really nice tools here like this change tracking and everything. So I just wanted you to see that on the Windows level for people who are concerned with that, there's a lot of similar tooling out here that's free of charge as well. And in fact, let's just go and talk about things like extended security updates and things like the software assurance things. So I want to go back to my Azure ARC area of the Azure portal. And so if I come over here, let's just talk about this thing where, yeah, so if I want to set that ability up to see all those different tools for the Windows level, you're going to see I come under this screen and I can pick a server here and I can say, hey, I actually want to activate those benefits and just want to show you how this looks. This is you coming into Azure and saying, yes, I have software assurance on my licensing, so I can get all these things for free. And so we don't double check that or anything, me, Microsoft. This is a trust game like most licensing is, right? So this is what, you do have to come in here. You can do it on a server by server basis. On this screen, you could pick all the servers and set it up. Or if it gets to where you've ARC enabled, 3,500 servers or something, there's a scripted way to do this as well through PowerShell, through Azure to say, go set this for all my servers too. So lots of ways to do it. But what I want to show you here on the screen real quick is that on the right-hand side there, it actually lists out all the various tooling that's out there for the Windows level, including Update Manager. You'll see here there's actually an Admin Center tool, so I can write from the Azure portal. So the whole story here, once again, is that when I say, how am I going to go look at something about my server on-prem or in Azure, it's a one-stop shop to go do it. It's the Azure portal, right? That's the story, once again, here that I hope really sinks in above all else today is you could live in a world where rather than having 15 different operational management tools out there that you're paying different licensing for and everything, you could have a one-stop shop. It could be the long-term vision here. So yep, there's that. And just want to show you a little bit about that extended security update thing, just in case anybody out there still hasn't done that for some servers. But let me go down here to this licensing area. So the concept here on the Windows level is that the first thing you do is you set up a license, and I'll just show you the screen here real fast. You come in here and you say, this is where I want all this stuff to live. Then I come down here and, like most licensing, it's going to be based on CPU in some way. So down here, it gives you the choice of, I'm not going to get into the details of this right now, but I have a choice between a physical core model or a virtual core model. I put in my number of CPU cores. And once I activate that license, we start charging you on a monthly basis for that cost going forward. And once you've activated, and then you take that license there and you apply it to the servers themselves. So you'll see here in the same interface, then there's a tab up here that says eligible resources. And then I pick my server sitting there and I say, yeah, I actually want to apply that license to those. And I click enable extended security updates and I'm off and running. So like I said, when you do all that, we start billing you through a monthly bill through Azure, and you now like automatically get your Mac keys installed on the servers, and all you have to do is go download patches and install them in your usual fashion. So that's how you do all that. Just wanted to show you real quick the interface for that, just so you have it in your head. But any questions on any of this? Just to pause for a moment again. Right.
Got a question.
Yeah.
So I asked earlier if you could tell if the server is up or down.
Yep.
Can you bring a server up or down?
There actually is a way to do that through the Windows tooling, yeah. And I have a colleague of mine who, in fact, I can follow up to the meeting here with a YouTube video he put together where he does his entire pitch on the Windows side of the house, and it's fantastic end to end, and he walks through every bit of that. Like if I want to remote into the server, I can do it from Azure. If I want to restart the server, I can do it from Azure, all those things, right? Yeah, like I said, this is truly end-to-end where you could see yourself someday managing all your Windows and Linux through Azure because all the tooling will be there to do it. Yeah.
Hypothetically, let's say you're a Game of Thrones corporation and you have a lot of contention amongst people that own servers, and I don't want you touching mine.
Yep.
Like, are there other policies that go along with the controls for administration? Or is it kind of like once a server has been connected, then you have the way it goes along with it by means of it being into the framework.
Well, you have complete control through the Azure portal to allow people to do whatever you want to allow them to do. So if you give them, and so if you've ever seen Azure, there are just a ton of roles out there, and there's so many because we create roles for every single application sitting out here. So like for best practice assessment, there are certain roles you have to enable for people to be able to use that tool if they don't have the higher level like contributor and global admin type roles, right? So if you want to keep it more granular down below that, you use those specific roles to each individual tool that's out here. And then on the server level, it all starts with that resource group. You can say across the board on the resource group, I'm going to allow people to see things in here, or I can go to individual servers and do it as well. So yeah, you have complete control over security through the Azure portal and everything you want to do. That makes sense? Yeah. Well, let's walk through a little bit about how do you actually go Arc enable a server here, and then I'll show a couple more things and wrap this up. But so if I want to go Arc enable a server, I come in here to this area called machines in my Azure Arc area, and now I go up to this area that says add create, and then I say add a machine. And then I'm going to have this screen here do I want to do this for multiple servers, just a one-time thing on one server. When you're doing this for an enterprise, you're going to pick that multiple server option. So then you're going to pick, what's the right subscription and where's the resource group earlier that I want all my stuff to land in. And so this is all going to be put into a PowerShell script in the end you're going to see. So then I'm going to pick my region where I want this to live. I'm just going to randomly pick one here. You'll notice here you do have the option. I could turn off the SQL Server part of this. I could say I really only want to Arc enable stuff for the Windows level and not even worry about SQL. So we give you that option right here to uncheck that box if you want. Of course, we always push for people to do it for everything, but and then down here is a little bit of networking I'll talk about in a moment. So I'll show you the list of you. When we say that this is communicating to Azure, there's a list of URLs that you're communicating with, and I'll show you that in a moment. Some of them have to go over public internet no matter what, meaning HTTPS 443. But you do have this private endpoint thing here that could force this over your private network into Azure. But this only handles about a third of the total URLs. But I have some customers that do go ahead and set this up anyway. And then they let the rest of it go over public. And you also have an option here to pick a proxy server. So you can say, if my servers can't communicate to the internet today, I can do my firewall rules on the proxy server and tell Azure Arc to communicate through that proxy server to go out, right? So a lot of things there on the networking setup options there. And just to show you real quick, a little diagram on that. This just kind of shows you your options here. Over here on option 1, that's my server. It's going over the internet. It's getting to Azure over here. Option 2, it's doing the same thing, but instead it's going through a proxy. But then down here, I could be going through my express route up, or VPN up into Azure if I've set up that kind of thing, right? So just a little more visual representation of what I was saying there. But let's get back here to wrong browser window. Here we go. And so the very last thing here, if you want to roll this out, say to thousands, hundreds of servers, whatever, since this is a PowerShell script in the end, you could just plug this script into something like SCCM or Ansible, even Active Directory group policy, any mechanism you have to go push a script out to a list of servers, you just plug your PowerShell script in there and it can push it out. But usually when you're doing like a POC on this, trying things out or whatever, you'll just kind of remote into the server, run the script and see how it's looking and everything. But that said, the reason I mentioned the service principal is because when you do that automated thing, this is going to be used one time. That's a thing. If you don't know what a service principal is in Azure, think of it like a service account on premises. It's just an account that's out there for administrative purposes. And the script is going to say, use that account to go hit Azure the first time. After that, it's going to have an ongoing communication mechanism with a key-based thing that gets swapped out all the time. But this is only used one time. It's not like an ongoing login to Azure using this service principal. So no security holes there, but this gets plugged into the script because it's just for that first time. And then you can see here when I'm done doing all that, yeah, this happens sometime. If I take too long, it times out and I have to start all over again. But let me just do this because I do want you to see the results of that. So I've got all that set up. And boom, this is probably going to fail again. Yeah, let's just start from the very beginning because I do just want you to see this here. I'm going to click on these things real quick here. Pick my region, go down, pick my service principal, and see the results here. Yeah, so you can see here, this just outputs a PowerShell script. You'll notice at the top there are some different options there that if I say, hey, I have Ansible for this rollout, the script might be just slightly different. So you pick that choice instead. But I will say with all the customers I've worked with on this, they usually just take the basic script and their administrator just kind of alters it however they want to make it work for them. But sometimes, you might have a sign kind of thing happening with PowerShell scripts and they need to account for that. But yeah, this just generates a script and you're off and running. So when I do proof of concepts with companies, I usually say, hey, let's go remote into a server. Let's run the script real quick manually. Then those objects start showing up like I showed you earlier, and we verify that everything's working as expected and all those things. So that's the gist. So this can like be the easiest IT project you ever do. You say, I want to roll out ARC to, 300 servers. I just generate the script, I go roll it out and I'm done. Of course, you want to take time and do the manual thing on a couple of servers first, make sure it's looking good. But like as far as the overall effort to do it across the enterprise, if you have a way of getting a list of servers into SCCM or whatever, you just roll it out and you're done, right? So a lot of people when they talk about this, they go like, yeah, that sounds great, but I'm just really booked, for the next 6 months. I don't have time for projects. And we just go, look, I can get on a call with you for 30 minutes and we can get this done seriously, right? So hopefully that comes through here from what I'm showing you. I'm not just showing vapor once again, that I just go through this interface, create a script, I run it, and it's up and installed, right? So any questions or thoughts on any of that? Yes. Everything I've shown you today, except I'm trying to think if I showed you anything that came with a cost. I think everything I literally showed you today is free of charge. Yeah. Yeah.
And someone's workstation,
No, this is for servers. Yeah. Yeah.
which show S's, I mean, is that?
It goes all the way back to 2008 R2 for Windows. Now you'll have some issues there. Yeah, I've seen some come because if you try to use newer versions of this script that gets generated, it's a little fussy. So you might have to use an older version of the agent, things like that. But it's doable all the way back to 2008 R2. Yeah. And so some of the tooling now that does vary, like for instance, best practice assessment, I think is for SQL 2016 and newer. So like you have to think about that on a tool by tool basis as well, that I can ARC enable all my servers back to a level and get that dashboard, but maybe I can only use, like the monitoring dashboard on a subset of my stuff, right? But of course, our product team can only do so much to make it work on every single OS we've ever, released or whatever. I'm kind of amazed we even go back as far as 2008 R2, frankly. But I mean, that's what, 15, 16 years old now. So yeah. So. All right. Well, I want to show you that networking thing really quick here, just 1 minute or less. So there's an article actually out here that when I said that you have to potentially poke holes in a firewall and all those things, this is the article you're going to hand to your network administrator, your security people, and say, this is a list of URLs I need, and they're going to take this and just go do what they do as far as firewall rules and everything. And so you'll see here, this article even describes what each one is for. It says, the one down here is for most of the SQL Server related services. I've got another one up here that's more about the monitoring sort of tools. So, you can look through this and you can choose and say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to use Azure Monitor anytime soon, so let's not open that URL just yet. You can get into that game, but most people just go ahead and, whoops, I didn't plug my computer in here, but I should be done here in a second anyway. So there's that. So any questions on this piece here? I just wanted you to see this real quick, that if that's a consideration, there is an article out there and you can get support on this and everything. And so the very last thing I wanted to show here real quick is the concept of pay-as-you-go licensing. So here I'm going to come back to my slide deck here, and I'm going to bring this up. And let's just say from here, and then get out of this mode again. Okay. And hopefully my buttons choose to work a little better right now. Okay. So there's this concept where, like I mentioned, the extended security updates you can pay on a monthly basis now. You could actually pay for your SQL licensing itself on a monthly basis now through the Azure portal. And it's a very similar concept, is you just go out there and make the decision, this is how I want to pay for SQL going forward. And so now that means no longer any every 3-year agreements you're signing for that or whatever. You just say, hey, for this server, I want to flip a button that says I'm doing pay-as-you-go SQL licensing, and you get charged for it. If you go crunch the numbers based on this slide right here, you're going to find out right away this is much higher than when I say much higher, I'm not talking double, I'm talking 25%-ish higher than what your normal agreements are going to be, right? But what you would do is work with your Microsoft rep and you say like, hey, I want to do this across the board for the whole enterprise. So what can you do for me? And what they're going to do is probably try to wrap that into some kind of agreement where, hey, if you're buying so many Azure services, including this, we're going to give you like a 20%, 25% discount across the board for everything, right? So that's how you would handle this if you're really interested in it. And, the value obviously for the people who manage licensing is they set this up and now it's out there in perpetuity. And any new server you build, you just set it up from day one, make it part of the onboarding process. And now you get a monthly bill for SQL licensing, right? So it sounds a little crazy at first. So this is the kind of thing it takes a few conversations to get people comfortable with the overall concept and everything. But once again, this is Microsoft's vision here, is we're trying to make it, quote, easier for you to do it. Now, I'll say I've heard in the past where a Microsoft rep came to me working in a company and said, I'm going to make it easy for you by just, enable Enterprise Edition across the board on your VM host. And I'm working at a mid-sized company. I'm saying we only need standard edition. That doesn't do anything for me. So I've heard that we're just going to make it easy for you story before. All I can tell you is that that's really what the goal is here, is to make this setup easy. Obviously, if we get you to do things like this, you're working in the Azure portal more and more. And the whole vision here is the more you get comfortable with that, the more you like the concept of cloud and all those things, right? But still knowing that you need on-prem servers too, no matter what you do. Like I've worked with some companies that have gone full on into Azure, some pretty major corporations, but they still have about 5 to 10% of their servers on-prem for various reasons. So that's where ARC comes in overall, right? It's like a way to manage all those things from a one-stop shop, including now your licensing, right? So let me just flip through a couple more slides here real quick and see if there's anything. So this just talks about the quote ease of the process. You just say, traditionally you would have gone out and bought your licenses. So this is really the traditional process, right? Like you go out and do your licensing agreement. A lot of people ask. All right. So I guess, hopefully everybody understands what Azure ARC's all about here. One thing I said I wanted just to share real quick, in the Azure OpenAI world, a colleague of mine on my team, actually, Amit Mukherjee, just released this book. If anybody hasn't had the time to expose themselves to Azure's OpenAI and that whole world, I highly recommend this book because I kind of flipped through it already, haven't read it yet, but it has sections that explain the concepts, but it actually has some really good chapters on practical use cases too. So for instance, if you want to try to build a chatbot against some policy documents, it walks you through in 5 pages, how do I go set that up real quick in the Azure portal and things like that. So just wanted to kind of give a plug for him here because this just came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago or so, and looks like a really good resource. You can find all this documentation. I mean, hopefully everybody agrees that Microsoft documentation that's out there these days is really comprehensive and everything, but it can be a bit hard, like poking around, finding the right thing at the right time because there's a ton of it, right? So I still think books like this are great resources because they attempt to wrap everything up into one consolidated thing. So, and my next session I'm going to be doing here in April is going to focus on a thing called AI skills in Fabric that actually allows you to build a chatbot against your structured data. So if I have data, think of it sitting in SQL Server today, and I want to build a chatbot against that, there's a custom way you can go out and do that right now. But Fabric has a feature that if you import your data into a Fabric storage area, you can set up a chatbot and do that with a few clicks of a few buttons, right? And so that's what we're going to focus on next time around. To kind of give to me, it's like a lot of companies are still struggling with how do I I get started with AI. And to me, some out of the box solutions like that could be a nice way to say, look, I can set this up in 5 minutes. We can try it out and show it to a lot of people, get people comfortable and all those things, right? So that's next time around. But, you know, like I've kind of put in a blurb I put out there on LinkedIn, I kind of said, hey, it's great to talk about AI and data analytics and all these things, but if I'm still reacting to applications crashing every day, I don't have a whole lot of time for that, right? So that's why I really like to focus on Azure ARC for companies, because I think it could really take a big bite out of the time you're spending in operations, so you can do those things. So.
That he's your colleague, your peer.
Yes, yeah, he works on my literal team actually. Yeah.
What's his title?
We are called technical specialists. So what that is like if you have a main salesperson that you interact with, they're called a sales solution specialist. And then we're the technical salesperson that just kind of helps them. Yeah, so if they say, hey, I want to see a demo on Fabric, I spend an hour with you and show you Fabric end to end. I show you Azure ARC end to end like I did today. Same thing with AI and all the stuff that we offer in the data and AI space. Yes.
Did your friend self-publish that or?
Well, this is, I see it has this pact. I'm not, yes, I'm not sure what that, I see that a lot. I'm not sure what company that is exactly, but yeah, it's definitely not self-published, though. It's out on Amazon and everything. So, yeah. Yep. That's a really good resource just to get started because, yeah, this is hard to find time, right? Sometimes you go like, I'd like to get my company started on this and maybe nobody's even asking me to, but you start reading about it and seeing what other people are doing and you go, wow, that could really do something. Like, for instance, like I worked at a law firm at Bryan Cave here for a long time. And so one thing our CIO said, it'd be great if we could take these tens of millions of documents we have on a file server and categorize those into the clients that they tie to, right? And so sometimes the lawyer might have put a client ID on the folder, sometimes they didn't, whatever, right? And so in the past, I was like, well, yeah, I could write an algorithm to try to do that, but knowing that that's not really that doable. And we'd have companies come in and estimate the work to do that. And they'd say, oh, $500,000 to even try it, not even to guarantee you'd get the results you want, that kind of thing. And as soon as I saw ChatGPT the first day, I started typing some things in it and I went, oh my God, I could go do that thing now, right? Because all I need is the metadata sitting there. And I say, take all that into account and try to match this up. And it does it. It feels like magic, but just so many things you can do, but it's just hard to get started on something new that seems that big and people are scared of it and all those things, right? So, yeah. So anyway, this book is just a great way, like as a technician or anybody really just to say, hey, I want to read a little bit of the theory and stuff, but then I want to actually go into Azure and try like 3 use cases real quick and it just walks you through a few things and all that. So. Well, hopefully this was helpful, everybody. I don't know if anybody else has any other questions or thoughts, but yeah.
There's no questions online. Wanted to thank you for your time and for the presentation, and we're looking forward to next month, which is evening meeting, just remember.
Yep. Have it on my calendar.